Welcome to Newsmax TV. I'm Kathleen Walter. Back from his trip to Martha's Vineyard, President Obama prepares for a major address on the end of the U.S. combat mission in Iraq. Joining us from Washington via Skype is Newsmax contributor and Middle East expert Dr. Walid Phares. Dr. Phares, welcome back to Newsmax TV.
Thank you for having me again.
President Obama plans an Oval Office address for Tuesday night. The president will likely tout the fulfillment of his campaign promise to end the war in Iraq, but there are reports that a number of independent contractors will be moving in and taking the place of many of our troops there. Do you see the war as being over? And if so, who won?
Well, look, basically ending the United States and coalition military presence in Iraq is something that a U.S. president or leader could do. But ending the war, you need to be two. To end the war, you need to completely defeat your enemy. That is not the case because Al-Qaeda is still around. It's going to continue with this campaign. And the Iranian regime still has a lot of activities between Baghdad and Basra. But the next stage is going to be really about the capacity of the Iraqi armed forces and their government to go against Al-Qaeda in the Sunni Triangle and to contain the Iranian role in the Shia areas. In that regard, will the government be able, first of all, it will have to form, and if it forms, will it be able to order its units to go against these two threats? And most important question for us in America, will we be next to them in that fight? We left behind about 50,000 for training and other purposes. If the Iraqi government will ask us to assist them in order to contain those two threats, this is going to be decided in Washington, and that will make the final call for have we won, are we winning, and will we winning in the future.
Dr. Phares, the White House has said that the president's speech will also touch on Afghanistan. Top U.S. commander there, General Petraeus, has said he might recommend a delay in the July 2011 drawdown of U.S. troops there. Defense Secretary Gates said Petraeus is mistaken. Should the U.S. be setting a deadline?
Look, all issues of deadlines while fighting the jihadist movement, should it be Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, we're going to maybe encounter them in other spots in the world, including in Africa and other areas as well. All the logic of having a deadline for us to withdraw or to deploy doesn't work with the jihadists. What would work, basically, the measurement is how many locals, how many Iraqis, how many Afghanis in this case, and others in the future will be joining the armed forces, how much cohesion is there within the country, within its own politics. I mean, in fact, it is going to be a war of ideas. How many among the Afghan civil society are going to be standing with their democratically elected government against the Taliban? And this is something you cannot measure with a military presence and deadlines. You can only measure with how many will go for elections, how many will actually stop the Taliban in their own villages, municipalities, and cities. So I'd say, yes, we could put a deadline, but the measurement is not about the deadline.
In the broader war against terrorism and as it relates to our national security, where do you see President Obama going? And you're a terrorism expert. Do you believe that he is on the right track?
I think in terms of identifying the enemy, this administration basically failed. Unfortunately, there were memos issued by high-ranking officials of the administration last year and this year in which it says we are not fighting a global war on the terrorists. We are actually not even fighting the jihadists. So if you do not identify the threat, you do not recognize the ideology behind that threat, it will be like we are in a classical war without radars, without AWACS, without any information coming from the other side. And that's why it is very important for the administration to correct its strategies, to redefine who we are fighting, to engage in a war of ideas, to make sure that we have partners in the region with whom we can fight this war of ideas. Otherwise, we could be, fighting it militarily, but the Taliban, the Khomeinis, and others are producing more and more younger and younger generations of jihadists. That war of ideas, we have not even begun to wage in it.
President Obama this week hosts Middle East peace negotiations at the White House between Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas. The Obama administration's special Mideast peace envoy, former Senator George Mitchell, says the goal is to have a peace deal within a year. Is that, in your view, a realistic goal?
I don't think that this kind of goal will basically do it. We've seen it so many times. I mean, since the signing of the first Declaration of Principles between the then PLO that became the Palestinian Authority and Israel in 1993, how many times U.S. and international envoys have been going to the region for the last more than 15 years now. And every time they try to bring in the Palestinian Authority and the Israeli government of all political parties, what happens? Who is the one who would spoil that? Who would begin sending the car bomb, the suicide bomb, and the rockets? Well, obviously, those who do not want to see a peace agreement between any Palestinian government and any Israeli government. So that would basically narrow it to Hamas, that would narrow it to the jihadists, who are supported by many forces in the region, and including Hezbollah from Lebanon, the Syrian regime, and the Iranian regime. So to boil it down to one point, as long as Iran is ordering Hamas and Hezbollah to bring down any peace process, any political process, I think no envoys, should it be the senator now or other envoys in the future, can really, cut a deal.
Dr. Phares, I'd like to get to Iran in just a second, but we are hearing that a key sticking point could be the issue of whether Benjamin Netanyahu will renew a 10-month settlement freeze set to expire later this month. Do you see both sides coming to an agreement on this issue?
Well, on the principle, we've seen before that both sides can come to an agreement. I mean, the Palestinian Authority really wants to start building their Palestinian state. All Israeli governments, including this one, would really want to get to a settlement at some point in time. There are very negative points that they could digest later. But again, those who are basically bringing down the negotiations are those who in Gaza and elsewhere are putting pressure on the Palestinian Authority not to make that minimum concession, not to accept the fact that the Israelis will have to deal with some domestic issues. That last 1 inch is bombed, basically, politically, by the allies of Iran. And that's why I do not see that at this point in time, other than the fact that they're going to sit down, send a good message, have the political dividends playing for all parties, but to get to a substance other than the one they've tried to reach for the last 15 years, I don't see it yet. Hopefully we will in the future.
Do you see Israel striking Iran as it continues with its nuclear quest? And if so, what kind of support do you think Israel would receive from Washington?
The real equation is not going to be who is going to strike Iran, the United States and its coalition, if we fail in finding a solution for the Iranian nuclear crisis, or the Israelis in this case, although the Israelis obviously have a higher interest in dealing with the issue because they are part of a very tight national security equation. It's really in the hands of the Iranian regime. If the Mahmoud Ahmadinejad regime wants to go forward with building the nuclear capacity, and that's only one component, but most importantly, continuing in building the long-range missile ramps, the delivery system, and add to it an anti-aircraft AA system to protect the ramps, I think these are signals coming to the international community, but also to the Israelis, that the Iranian regime is moving forward. And by the time they are going to be deploying all of these systems, anti-aircraft, long-range missiles, and having just a minimum nuclear capacity, everything will change for the Israelis. So they are on a clock. The Israelis are on a clock that is different from the United States and from the rest of the international community.
Okay, let's talk about New York, because the debate continues over the proposed construction of that mosque at Ground Zero. How do Islamists in the Middle East view Americans' overwhelming disapproval for its construction?
Look, in the region, if you review the media, the printed media, and the reactions, you'll see that there are three types of reactions. Obviously, as you just mentioned, the Islamists, Islamiyun, the jihadists in general terms, they're very excited about the issue because they understand it has a political ramification. If you read their comments, they talk about the fact that it has a name that was viewed in the past at the capital of the caliphate, and now it's going to be done, even though it's symbolically in New York. They are excited about it because that is a leading phenomenon for mobilization, for indoctrination, and for eventual clash. In the middle, you have moderates who are saying, we need not basically to engage in this provocation. Why do we have to do it? There are so much other locations where we could establish any mosque that we want, because America is about religious freedom. The third element, which we have not seen enough here in the West, are Muslims who are anti-jihadists, who are saying, spending $200 million on this tower, very close from an important location for most Americans, if not all Americans, while we have victims of floods in Pakistan while we have poverty around the region does not make sense. I mean, putting that much petrodollars in one location while you have disasters in the region, while mosques have been destroyed in Pakistan and other places, it doesn't make sense for many of these Muslims and Arabs.
All right, Dr. Walid Phares, thank you so much for joining us. It's always good to see you here on Newsmax TV.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for watching Newsmax TV.